As NFL fans, this is arguably our favorite time of year. Even more so than the regular season, even more so than the playoffs. It's the NFL draft, at least for those hardcore fans of us. This is the weekend that we live for. Hope springs eternal every year, and we enjoy it. And now that the 2023 NFL draft is in the rearview mirror officially, it's over. Everybody feels kind of beaten down and worn out, and yet and still can't wait to do this shit all over again next year. But you'll see people talking about, I don't even want to hear about the 2024 NFL draft right now. And give them 24 to 48 hours and people already start talking about it. And I will too. I contribute to that delinquency. But anyways, now comes the fun part, where we start talking about winners and losers and draft grades and so forth. And throughout the next week, I'll be grading the different teams' performances in the 2023 NFL draft. But a couple hours after the draft is over, now's the time to take a way too early reaction to the biggest winners and losers. And a couple of call-outs here. One is that it's not just solely about the players that were taken and when they were taken. That could be a part of it. But it could be also about approach and philosophy, both on the positive and the negative spectrum. That's one thing. Number two, there's no team that I look at in this particular draft that I thought was so booty ass below anybody else in terms of their draft performance that, merits like an over-the-top rant. There are some teams I question different things about it, but those could be questions, and in the moment they may look like losers, and in a couple of cases they might end up being winners in the long term. But not everybody can be a winner. It's not fucking giving everybody a participation trophy. So let's go ahead and dive in. My biggest winners and losers from the 2023 NFL Draft. I'm going to start off with the winners and count them down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Number 5, the Cincinnati Bengals. I really thought they had a very good mix of upside and future contributors. For the most part, just kind of staying where they were at on the board and taking best available player. Myles Murphy, DJ Turner, Jordan Battle. There was a clear emphasis here early in the first 2 days of the draft to focus on the defensive side of the ball, and then to turn around on day 3, get a couple of guys and Charlie Jones and Chase Brown that you could see having roles in that offense in the future, especially Charlie Jones potentially being Tyler Boyd's long-term replacement in the slot, and then getting the punter Brad Robbins late. So really good mix there for a team that's contending. Sometimes it can be really hard to have a good draft with your draft position, and the Bengals do well for themselves. Staying in the AFC North, there's going to be a big, heavy feel for that. And admittedly, the margins were kind of close here. There were a couple other teams that were right in the mix. Number 4, though, the Baltimore Ravens. You're going to pay Lamar Jackson that much money. You better give him some more damn help, and that's what they did in the first round by drafting Zay Flowers, who is my wide receiver 1 in this year's class. Love that pick for them. The second round pick that they didn't have was due to sending that to Chicago to get Roquan Smith, who ended up finishing as a first-team All-Pro. So, yeah, that's got to count as part of the draft grade. Then they turn around and get Trenton Simpson in round 3. And late round 3. This is a guy that was thought by a lot of people to be linebacker 1 in this draft. I had a first round grade on him. They got him in late round 3 because of course the fucking Ravens did. And then you go to day 3 and you get Tavius Robinson, who feels like the prototype, bigger, longer Ravens edge. And then Andrew Voorhees trading up in the middle of the 7th round. Feels like a guy you're going to redshirt in 2023, but could be a future starter on the interior of that line. Really good work once again for the Baltimore Ravens in the draft. But not the best performance out of the AFC North, ironically enough. Number 3, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'll put their first 5 picks in this draft up against any other team. Any other team. Just from a pure pick standpoint, talent, value, everything else. Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr., Keanu Benton, Darnell Washington, Nick Herbig. When you look at those 5 players right there, I had trouble finding a team that had 5 better players back to back in terms of their first 5 picks. Now, I'm not even talking about the whole story of Joey Porter Jr. playing for his dad's old team. This is more about the prospect and the fit, and it was decent value there. All 5 of these guys are at a minimum value picks and potential future steals. I loved what the Pittsburgh Steelers did. They got better this weekend. Number 2, the Chicago Bears. Yes, it certainly feels like a homer pick, but to be fair, I don't have them at number 1. But a big reason for this is what they did with the first overall pick. They turned the first overall pick into DJ Moore, Darnell Wright, Tyreek Stevenson, basically because of the trade. They got pick 61 from the Panthers, used that to bounce up to 56 to get Stevenson, who's going to be at minimum CB2 for them on the outside, opposite Jalen Johnson this year. They got a 2024 first-round pick, a 2025 second-round pick, just off of having picked 1 overall. Then, in day 3, they get potential future starters like Roschon Johnson, Tyler Scott, Terrell Smith. Now, this was a good draft for Ryan Poles. It wasn't perfect to me. I wasn't a particularly huge fan of the double dip at defensive tackle. We'll see how that pans out. Also felt like they should have tried to address edge once, and you're going to say, well, they took Noah Sewell. And I'm going to say, like I said, they failed to address edge rusher. Center, there were opportunities there, like taking Gervon Dexter Sr. over John Michael Schmitz. Feels like an odd choice to me. And in a deep tight end class, didn't address that position once. Again, not perfect. Hard to address everything in one draft, I'll grant you. A couple of choices I would have done differently. Otherwise, they might have been number 1. But they're number 2 in terms of my biggest winners just because of what they did mostly. With a couple of their picks in day 3, did some really, really good work in rounds 4 and 5. And then when you look at what they turned pick number 1 into, that was a hell of a haul for them. But my biggest winners in this year's draft, the Arizona Cardinals. To move back from 3 to 12, they got a 2024 first rounder and third rounder from the Houston Texans. And it's the Texans' pick. That shit could be really, really high next year. And then they bounce up from 12 to 6 to go get the guy they wanted to take all along any damn ways. They also get, from trading down in round 2, a 2024 third-round pick for the Tennessee Titans. So Monty Ossenfort, in his first draft with the Cardinals, he put in some work here. He positioned this Cardinals organization well for 2024 and beyond. You could also see the philosophy of taking athletes with big upside in the first 2 days of their draft. You're talking about Paris Johnson Jr., Ojulari, Garrett Williams, Michael Wilson. Some of these guys could pay off in a big way for them, outplay their draft position in a couple of cases. You got multiple potential day 3 contributors in terms of John Gaines, Clayton Tune, Dante Stills. I really, really like the work that the Arizona Cardinals and general manager Monty Ossenfort put in this weekend. So they were my biggest winners, in part because of what they did to position themselves in next year's draft. Now let's flip and talk about the losers. And before the fans of these teams cry too much about this, it is what it is. Not everybody can be a winner. Some teams have better drafts than others. But even then, I don't look at any of these and feel like they totally and completely botched it. My 5th biggest loser, the Washington Commanders. If Sam Howell's supposed to be your guy, why are you spending your first 2 picks on defensive backs? It's not even so much just about the players they took. It's more about the approach and philosophy. You don't take a quarterback, then you don't really do much early to help your young quarterback, who was a 5th-round pick himself last year. It's just odd. And then in a really deep tight end class, it's one thing if you didn't take Dalton Kincaid at pick 16, although he seemed like a great option for them there and should have been the guy to me. You don't address that position once in this entire draft? Strange, to say the very least. Number 4, the Cleveland Browns. They had some good picks in round 3 and on day 3. I'll give them that. But at the end of the day, they gave up the first and second round picks in this year's draft to send to Houston for fucking Deshaun Watson, who played 6 games last year, wasn't very good, and, you're just hoping that he stays away from any more massage appointments. They got nothing out of Deshaun Watson last year and gave up first and second round picks to get that nothing out of him. So until they get something out of Deshaun Watson, they're going to continue to be draft losers because of how much draft capital they gave up to get him. Number 3, the Detroit Lions. And some of you might be looking and thinking that I was going to make them number 1. Man, probably a number of other people are too. I can't go that far. One of the reasons they're losers is because they lost out on Devin Witherspoon. That was clearly their guy. It just was. We all know it was. Because as soon as Seattle took him, Detroit couldn't wait to peel back from 6 to 12. So they lost out on the top guy on their board. Then they turn around and reach big time on Jack Campbell at 18. At least by a round, maybe 2. But more so, especially in this draft, I understand the fear of, hey, you really like this guy and you're not sure he's going to be around, at maybe the middle point of round 2, then maybe trade up into the top part of round 2 if you have that much of an affinity for him. Just not necessary to take him there at 18. You reached a little on Sam Laporta on 34 and reached a little more for Hendon Hooker at 68. There were some reaches, like positional value, board value didn't really seem to matter that much to the Detroit Lions. Some of you are going to say, well, they took Jahmyr Gibbs at pick 12. What the fuck were they doing? They took running back 1 in this draft, in my opinion. That's what the hell they did. He's going to be scary, that speed in that backfield. But some of these picks were a bit questionable to me, so I got him at number 3. Number 2, the Houston Texans. And you're going to say, well, I thought you had C.J. Stroud as your QB1. Right. That's one pick, and that's the most important pick. And if they got that right, they'll be set up well for a time. But looking at the bigger picture, and like I said, it's not always just about the picks. It's about the approach and the strategy and the execution. To go from 12 to 3 and give up a 2024 first and third round pick, and not the Browns' first round pick next year, but your own, which could potentially be very high. May not be, but it certainly could be. For an edge rusher that may not have been edge rush 1 in this draft is really questionable strategy. And to me, frankly, pretty bad for a team that has a lot of holes on its roster. I know you had a lot of picks in this year's draft. You have some additional draft pick capital next year, but you need to use a lot of that draft pick capital. I thought Scruggs was a reach in round 2. So when I look at that bigger picture, that's what makes me feel like the Texans are losers. And you could look back at it a year from now and feel like they were really big losers for making that deal. My biggest losers, though, in this draft, the Carolina Panthers. They gave up 9, 61, a 2024 first-round pick, a 2025 second-round pick, and DJ Moore to get to 1 in the draft to ultimately to take, I don't give a fuck what you say, a lighter, less athletic, weaker arm version of Kyler Murray. They traded up like that to take an exception to the prototype on the negative side, and a big exception to the prototype on the negative side. It would have been one thing if they traded all this up to go to 1 and take Anthony Richardson, because then you at least say, shit, he's on the high side of the prototype. He is on the high side of the exception. He's a freak. You ain't calling Bryce Young a freak. And teams got to be careful when they take these quarterbacks number 1 overall that are exceptions to the prototype. You see how that didn't work out for the Browns with Baker Mayfield. You see how that's kind of going for the Cardinals and Kyler Murray. Now, I think Bryce Young has a better head on his shoulders, a better heart in his chest, a better feel for the game, better instincts, better work ethic, all of that. So I'm not saying that Bryce Young is going to be a bust, but the Panthers gave up a lot for a guy that lacked elite tools, and that usually doesn't go well. And even if you weren't a fan of Will Levis in this draft, was Bryce Young so much better than Will Levis that you couldn't have just sat there at 9 and potentially have Levis there and just take him then? Is there really that much of a difference between these two guys? Was there so much of a difference that you basically gave up a package that it insinuates that Bryce Young was a generational talent? Now, some of you are probably going to come back to this video in a few months and maybe the Panthers win the division. And you're like, ooh, that shows that you fucking know. They could win the division and Bryce Young's kind of to okay as a rookie. That doesn't make the decision right. Now you've got Bryce Young. You're going to have limited draft pick capital, limited premium capital the next couple of years. Makes it a little bit harder to build around the young man on that offensive side of the ball. I felt like they gave up a lot for, at the end of the day, to get the guy that was a huge exception to the rule on the negative side of the scale, which I just think is typically bad business at the top of the draft. So that's my thoughts. The biggest winners and losers from the 2023 NFL Draft. As always, you are welcome to tell me your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to see how many of you disagree with me. Panthers fans with their keyboard fingers ready to flame away at me in the comments. Bring it on!